Today's Monday Mentors episode of Lone Star Lawyers on the Varsity Podcast Network is brought to you by Varsity Search. Varsity Search specializes in helping small law firms in Texas hire lawyers and build great teams. In fact, we are doing a search right now for an insurance defense associate in Austin. So if you or someone you know is looking to make a lateral move in Austin, let me know. Varsity Search, building great teams. Hey everyone, Daniel here back with you on Lone Star Lawyers. And before we get into this episode, just want to again pause and acknowledge what is seemingly every day a new, different world that we're living in, and it doesn't seem to be going away, obviously, anytime soon. So we know that many of you are either working from home, trying to stay as productive as you can, and are also potentially dealing with, if you've got young kids, you've got that going on. Depending on your clients, they might have different types of demands at this point. And so it's just a very stressful time to be a lawyer, I'm sure, on top of the stress that already exists when you are a lawyer. And so we want to just acknowledge that and let you know that we are here with you. We are praying for you. We want to be a resource and hopefully with today's episode and some of the others we've got coming, be a place where you can both get away some and then also have a practical guide to work through this as well. That's really what more of this episode today is about. So just want to let you know that we're with you. And if you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. And today, we are going to take an unusual amount of time, most of our time, as we visit with our guest, Brian Lopez. Brian is a trial lawyer in Houston. He's got his own firm, the Lopez Law Group, which has grown like crazy since he launched it several years ago. He's a great guy. I've known him for a long time, successful lawyer. Hires lots of young lawyers, so he's got a lot of experience with many of you in the audience, or not specifically necessarily, but young lawyers like you. And so, and he has been on the front lines of getting his practice into a situation of being able to work remotely, to be online and cloud-based, to be able to adapt to something like this. And so I think it was very fortunate and timely that he and I were able to get together and record this episode. As you probably have figured out, most of our episodes we record pretty well in advance of when they air. This particular one, as we are talking here on Monday, was just recorded a couple of days ago. And so now recognizing that within a couple of days, the way this news cycle and the way this virus is going at the speed it's going is an eternity. It's just been 8 days since the NBA canceled its season, and that seems like forever ago. So recognizing this could already be out of date by the time we air it, or at this point, just wanted to get this episode out in front of you as soon as I recorded it. And so that's what we're doing here. So with that said, I am excited to visit with Brian about how this coronavirus is what it's doing to the legal industry, to law practice, his firm's practice specifically, and what you as young lawyers can do to weather this storm and get through this. So I'm excited that you're with us today. I appreciate it. And I'm excited to have you hear from Brian Lopez today. So let's get to that conversation. Thanks for being with us on today's Monday Mentors episode of Lone Star Lawyers. Brian Lopez joins us right now, live from, what are we calling this? Social distance,
Exactly.
2020.
Hashtag social distance.
Hashtag social distancing. Well, this is the first conversation for this podcast that I've had since this has all started. And so I thought it was definitely timely and appropriate to visit with you and to just start a little different, spend some time talking about how this is impacting law practice, in general, but specifically for you, just to kind of give us your perspective and what you're seeing. So let's just start there. What's going on in your practice? What are you hearing from clients? How are you communicating with them, and kind of what's going on?
Yeah. So I think let's talk about the first part about how is it impacting the clients. The immediate thing that we've seen from clients is no different than you've seen from your family, your friends, your neighbors. A little bit of fear more about the health aspects and the social aspects, but I think also a broader fear about what does this mean about the economy? What does this mean about my job, et cetera? So I think there is some trepidation from the client standpoint. Still, I think we're at the point because we haven't really reached what I would consider to be a tipping point. This is only going to get worse, probably not better for a little while.
Correct. Yeah.
There's still some general overall concern on the client end. At the same time, there's this general commitment by both clients, other attorneys, to sort of keep everything going. Because
Okay.
if nothing else, people want to make sure if and when this does end, and if it ends abruptly, that everyone has their ducks in a row and they've done their job to make sure they've helped their clients. So I think that's sort of the first issue that I've seen on the client end. On the business side, it's been a little bit different. On our end, we took a lot of. I began to see some what I thought concerning things about 3 weeks ago, and so at that point, we started making our moves internally to sort of prepare for this. So
Wow.
where we
Okay.
are, yeah, where we are now. I mean, we've been working remotely for a week, where everybody no one is in the office. Everybody is working effectively from their homes, but we sort of had our expectations and our plans in place as of 2 to 3 weeks ago. So it hasn't been too big of a concern. I think the biggest thing from an employer standpoint is to number one, make sure that your employees are reassured, because they're certainly concerned and afraid. So we've tried to target that pretty early on, even in meetings we had last week before we physically closed the office. So I think it's unprecedented times, Daniel. But at the same time, for everyone, be it attorneys or any other type of business, people just have to adapt. And those that are able to adapt pretty quickly are going to be able to sort of keep the trains rolling. Those that are having a harder time are really going to have to adjust.
Yeah. Well, I want to follow up on a couple of things that you mentioned. One is just how early you saw that this was going to be a significant issue and started making, plans and putting into effect policies. How did that come about? It appears to me, it seems like that's relatively soon ahead of the curve that most of us in the country got that. So what was it for you that triggered that?
Yeah, I think a little bit was luck in terms of personal experience. My wife and our kids and I had just been to Europe. We had been to Germany. We had been to France at the end of February, maybe the third
wow.
week of February. So at that point in time, it was a non-issue even in Europe, but we began to see people in the airports and in the public areas with masks. So there was beginning to become concern. And then as you saw, this began to sort of, obviously it appeared to form and begin in Asia and then moved quickly as people began traveling. That was concern number one. Concern number two for me was probably the first week of March when Apple, Facebook, and all the tech companies began to send their employees home, probably because of the outbreak in Seattle.
In
Once that
Northwest,
happened,
Seattle.
once that happened, it became, I always look at things in terms of if I'm clearly not the smartest person in the room, so I want to see what the smartest people in the room are doing. And when you see the tech companies sending all of their folks home, that's a pretty big sign. And I think the third thing that I really found was Harvard moved pretty quickly to start taking their classes online. And so that to me was sort of the telltale point where, okay, we need to be prepared for this. That was probably maybe at the end of the first week of March, beginning of the second week. And so at that point in time, luckily we had already made investments as a startup company to have remote working, to have all of our software platforms and our litigation platforms on the cloud. And so those investments at the time were painful because they were expensive,
Yeah,
right? But
sure.
looking back now into March, it's completely saved us
Oh,
to
yeah.
where when we sent our folks home and said, "Hey, start working from home," we already had a litigation platform that they had used, which was cloud based. They had the ability to access all of our files remotely, and so it was just a matter of them physically being able to work from home, but no different than what they would do at the office.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, do you? I normally ask this in a different way at the end, but I'm curious. Do you have, as I'm sure that not every firm, particularly small firms, had the head start that you did and had the foresight that you did, and they're playing catch up now, and it may be in some ways not fair to compare it or make it put this on. But I know law firms are trying to scramble in some ways to figure this out. What tools are you using? What are some of those platforms that you're using that you recommend, if any? I mean, what suggestions do you have for firms that are 2 weeks behind you, and really they're a year or two behind you because of when you started this, laying the foundation to be able to do this? But what would you suggest for some of those firms?
Well, I'll tell you what worked for us. I had about a year and a half to 2 years ago, I had an attorney who worked for me, who doesn't work for me now, who said, and he was right out of law school, and he said, you really need to be looking at a cloud-based software program, and we had not thought about that because at that point in time, everything we did was pretty much in the office, or you could print something out and bring it home. What I would call sort of the traditional law practice that many of us have done for 20 years. And
Right.
so he had made the recommendation. And so I started looking into it. I had talked to a few other small law firms. And one of the recommendations we got back that I did research on was called Clio. And
Sure.
when I looked into Clio, which was, cloud based, but it was really looking for sort of smaller law firms. About a year ago, we transitioned to Clio and began to slowly move everything that essentially we had on our office server. We began to move it into Clio, and
Yeah.
the benefit of doing that is because it's cloud based. We were able to quickly access that from anywhere in the world, really, which was something that was impossible before. So I think that was sort of the first program that I was really looking at. The other thing that I think is extremely critical for small law firms that's been really beneficial for me is having a really good, a relationship with someone you trust that handles your IT.
Hmm.
That was
Yeah.
critical for us. And I had when we started this law firm in 2017, I was already using the current company that we're using now, and so they've been really beneficial in the sense that when we told them 2 or 3 weeks ago, hey, I need to make sure everybody has this ability to do it from their laptops. They set aside 2 days in the early March and came in to where everybody could bring their laptops in. Everybody had the software. Everybody had the ability, to get into our server remotely. They had their passwords and everything else. I think those were the two really critical things, in terms of platforms that we use. The other thing that I think has been really helpful for us, and it's more for probably attorneys or small businesses that have done a work in and around the Gulf Coast or in and around California, is we unfortunately in 2017, about 3 months after we started this business, Hurricane Harvey hit and completely shut down
Yeah.
our ability not to do work, but to get to the office. So that became really critical early on as a startup company because we had to figure out, okay, this is the second or third hurricane to make landfall in the Texas Gulf Coast, and over the course of 8 years, we probably need to do something about that. So we
Right.
went ahead and we at that point started making the investments that we needed to make.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Good for you. And thanks for sharing that. Appreciate it. The other thing I wanted to follow up with you on is just what communication you're receiving from the various courts and jurisdictions in which you practice, in terms of what are, what's delayed, what's postponed, what's still going, kind of what are some things you can share from some of those perspectives?
Yeah. So as a Texas law firm, about I want to say a week to 10 days ago, the Harris County courts, which are the courts here in Houston, they were the first ones to sort of put out an alert to the attorneys that they were going to be potentially pushing off cases, only having hearings on a needed basis, certainly would entertain hearings remotely. So that was sort of the big thing first. We then saw, I think the Bexar County courts in San Antonio did something similar. And then this past weekend, I want to say maybe on Friday, the Texas Supreme Court came out with their order, which essentially gives an extension of deadlines up to an additional 30 days after the state of Texas emergency declaration. So
Right.
that was kind of, as soon as we got that, the first thing we did is we began to circulate that to our clients. So our clients knew, hey, the courts are certainly becoming aware of this. Secondly, we knew with all trial settings, almost all of those are going to get pushed off because as we've discussed before, this social distancing, which has become, it's going to be like the number one sort of new word for 2020 when we get the new dictionary. It's going to be social distancing, but it's really hard to have a jury trial. And my understanding is some courts may actually still be in trial, but for the most part, the courts have been pretty understanding about pushing those back. All of the other attorneys that I've worked with, and certainly those that have their own smaller businesses, have been, pretty responsible in terms of agreeing to push things back, agreeing to work together. And I think the biggest thing is everybody is really concerned just about the public health crisis,
Absolutely.
because not only is that critical for our communities, but also for those of us who are business owners and small business owners. We need to do everything possible to keep our employees healthy, but at the same time, make sure that we can continue to run this business because paying those employees, making sure they have a job is going to be critical for our economy moving forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Are you, I mean, remotely, obviously, are you, do you have scheduled or have you conducted depositions or kind of preliminary discovery type procedures or hearings since this has started or that are still on the calendar in the next week or two that will be done remotely?
So we have some on the calendar for the next week or two. I actually have a virtual mediation scheduled
Okay.
for early next week. So what we've sort of told our clients and our recommendations is, to our clients, for us, to the extent we can keep these depositions going, we certainly want to do that because we don't know how long or how short this is going to go on. So the last thing we want to do is to be unprepared on something. At the same time, many of us have already had experience with remote depositions because you have some of these cases that have, tens of, hundreds of attorneys. It's not always feasible to have those attorneys in the same place. So oftentimes attorneys will take those remotely. Now it's become even more critical to make sure you identify your exhibits early on, that you're sharing those exhibits, at least arrange with opposing counsel, and that your court reporter has those, your virtual court reporter. But for the most part, a lot of these depositions should be able to occur. A lot of people want to push them back because if they had to choose, they would rather do them in person. The problem is you don't know how long you're going to push it back.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, we've encouraged certainly our attorneys and the other folks that we're working with is that if the other side is game to doing it virtually, we are as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. What advice do you have for maybe young lawyers who are now in a position of working maybe 100% from home or remotely just in terms of being able to continue to do good work and to stay on top of things, stay in communication with whether it's their partner that supervises them or whatever. What's some things that young associates ought to be thinking about during this kind of unusual time?
Yeah, I think well, so there's probably three things that I would look at. Number one, communication is critical, and I'll come back on touch on each of these, but I think
Yeah.
communication is critical. I think routine is critical, so establishing a routine. And the third thing I think is important for not just young attorneys, but really for everyone in this time, is mental health. I think those are sort of the three things that I would recommend. The first thing, let's talk about on the communication aspect.
Yeah.
For me, I have a call with my team leads at 8 a.m. every morning, Monday through Friday. And our firm is set up in such a way that we have multiple teams. Rather than me having a conference call with 20 people throughout the teams, I'm having a conference call with my 2 or 3 people who are really in charge of running cases.
Right.
After that call, which typically might take 30 minutes, if there are 3 or 4 of us on, they will then go to their separate calls with their teams, people who are actually on their teams. I will then begin to talk with our financial team at the law firm, because obviously we want to keep an eye on not only money coming in, but checks going out, anything else. And then I have a call sort of with my operations head, because we have to make sure from the operations side that everybody has work that needs work, especially working remotely. So I think communication is the number one thing I would encourage young attorneys to focus on, whether that's a daily call with the partner you work for, whether that's reaching out to clients to see if there's anything they need in these particularly questionable times for many people. There might be other people out there that need legal work that just are buried and haven't had the chance to pick up the phone.
Yeah.
But then I also think it's not just upstream for young attorneys. You have to communicate downstream. You have to communicate with the people that are reporting to you, whether that's your paralegals, your legal assistants, anyone else, because for as much concern as you might have as a young attorney, there are other people who are part of the administrative function of a law firm that are just as concerned. So
Sure.
keeping that communication is extremely important, and is something that we really thrive on at our firm at Lopez Law Group. So that's the first piece, the communication aspect. The second piece is routine. What we told when we went remote, we told our group we were doing a couple things. One, all of our phones were getting forwarded to our receptionist, who is offsite. So anybody calls our office, it goes straight to her. Our office hours are 9 to 6, Monday through Friday. And so we have told our team from the beginning, you need to get into this routine. You need to plan on, just like if you were at the office at 9 in our real office, for your virtual office, you need to be there. You need to expect to take a 1-hour lunch break. And you need to expect to, we're going to have office hours until 6 o'clock. That routine is I think, helpful for all of us. Around that, the other thing that I've tried to do, which is personally helpful for me, and what I've encouraged my young attorneys to do, is you have to develop some amount of time inside of this routine to take care of your physical well-being. Whether the CDC right now is told everyone to avoid crowds, avoid anywhere where you're going to be inside of 6 feet of another person. But certainly that allows people to still get their exercise, to go for a walk, to go for a jog. I think that's a critical part of routine. Sure. Because physically, as young attorneys, and certainly anybody involved in the legal field, typically because of the amount of stress, because of the amount of hours, more often than not, attorneys and folks that work in the legal field do a pretty good job of trying to take care of themselves physically, whether that's going to the gym, whether that's going for a jog, a swim, et cetera. This really is no different. I mean, if anything, this is a more stressful time, because many of us are at home with our children, at home with our spouses, and we're not used to this. We're used to being at the office for 40 plus hours, and for some of us, many more hours than 40. And so this is a new dynamic. It's important, though, as part of that routine, to take care of yourself physically. So I would certainly encourage any young attorney to certainly do that. The last piece I think is extremely important, Daniel: mental health.
Yes.
Mental health is something I think that has become more and more important. I've been practicing law in Texas now for 20 years. I never heard anybody, my first 5 years, really reference mental health. I feel like there has been more discussion about it in the past 5 years, and certainly in the past 1 to 3 years. And
Yeah,
so
for sure.
I think mental health right now is extremely important because we might have many attorneys or many people who listen to your podcast who are used to being in an office of 40 or 50 people per day, and now they're completely isolated. So
Right.
that is a big transition for many of us who feed off of the energy of our other attorneys, our other paralegals, our support staff. We need that to help us with ideas, to help us figure out how to solve problems. So it's critical that people pay attention to that mental health aspect. And so, what am I talking about in terms of how do you pay attention to that? Well, certainly you can continue with sort of your online meditations, your online yoga, having phone calls with your close friends or people that you work with. But a lot of people, I think, are grappling with um, this fear of the unknown, this fear of uncertainty. And that's natural in a situation like this that, frankly, none of us have ever experienced or lived through. There have always been sort of short term roadblocks and short term fears, whether it's the war on terrorism or any problems in 2008 with a recession in the economy.
Right.
But this now becomes a physical fear of the unknown as to whether or not people are going to be safe moving forward. And that I think scares a lot of people, and it should scare a lot of people. So it's important. It's especially important for young attorneys, anybody involved in the legal field, to keep track of the mental health aspect and to do the things, frankly, that they were doing before. If they were speaking to a therapist before to help them work through any issues, you can continue to do that. You can just do it on the phone or by a virtual meeting. If it was yoga, I'm a big fan of yoga. I would typically go to yoga 3 times a week. I'm trying to do it in my living room before the kids wake up. Um,
Right.
there are those things that I think we still have to do. It's just like everybody else right now. We have to make an adjustment. We have to make a sacrifice.
Yeah.
But certainly those are things that everyone is capable of doing. I would certainly encourage for anybody, at this point with trying to figure out how do I work through this, focus on communication, establish a routine, and pay attention to your mental health.
Well, I think those are excellent, excellent points. And I'm so appreciative of you sharing them and having such great thoughts on all of this. And in the limited time that we have left, I do want to address a couple of things that we would normally talk about on this show. And so we can continue some level of normalcy. You're still practicing law. You still have a business to run.
Yes.
And our lawyers that listen still have work to do and still maybe have career decisions to make and all of that. And so like you were just kind of describing, like we want to be mindful and take care of ourselves. And at the same time, we know we all still have lives to live just in an adapted way. But I'll pick a topic of hiring associates. And so when you go through the process, and most of our listeners now maybe been out a couple of years, so they've kind of maybe got that first job, but now are thinking about where to go next, or if to go somewhere. So when you're looking at possibly hiring someone that's been out for a couple of years, maybe a young lawyer, what are some of the things that you're looking for? Maybe starting with on paper, on a resume and a cover letter, writing sample, whatever you might look at first. What are the things that stand out to you that you're looking for?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the number one thing that I look at in terms of on paper is I'm looking at writing samples. I'm looking
Yeah.
for people who can communicate in two ways. One, we always have to communicate, certainly to the court, whether if we're trying to make legal arguments, if it's an appeal, if it's a motion, a response, something like that. You have to have the ability to communicate through legal writing. You have to be able to take multiple issues and really get down to the most important issue and certainly do the analysis on that issue for the benefit of the court. That's the first thing I'm looking at. The second thing, though, is an entirely different part of writing, which is really important to what we do in litigation. We have to communicate with our clients. oftentimes our clients are not attorneys. They might be small business owners. They might be, we do a lot of construction, folks that, may have started the business at the age of 18, right after they got out of high school, are extremely successful, but wouldn't necessarily understand complex legal terms because that's not how they've made their money.
Right.
You have to be able, what I'm looking for is people who can also explain complex issues, complex legal issues, in a way where a non-attorney would be able to understand it.
Yeah.
And sometimes attorneys make the mistake of being so verbose or focusing on so many legal issues, when in reality, it's extremely important that you can take the complex things and make them very easy to understand. So, for example, that really hits home to me because I try cases, right? Once a year, I at least try to get in and pick a jury. If I'm trying a complex case about some sort of a construction defect or a medical malpractice issue, which involves a lot of technical terms, I have to find a way to synthesize that into the easiest way for 12 people who are serving on a jury who have a variety of backgrounds, how they can understand it.
Right.
Um, so for me, looking for young attorneys, I'm looking for people who can do both, who can understand and convey complex legal arguments, that can also translate that to someone who might be on a jury to be able to understand. That's
Right.
that's the first thing I'm looking
Yeah.
at. The second thing, and I've gotten better and better about this, um, firm culture. I've got to find someone that fits in with our firm culture. First of all, you have to figure out what your firm culture is. If you don't know what it is, you can't find what you're looking for. So it's taken, my law partner is my wife. It's taken us a while to figure out the type of culture that we want, and it's been a little bit through trial and error. But I'm very much looking for people that interview that are going to fit into our firm culture, that are going to fit into the dynamics of what we're looking for, which is not very different than what we discussed. Certainly, good writing, good academics, but also someone who can come in and will be an asset to a group of 20 people that we already have. Someone who's
Right.
going to want to be a part of a team, not someone who's going to want to, sort of work on their own. That we're not set up
Yeah.
to hire individuals. We're set up to hire people who can become part of a team that we've already have established. So
Right.
those
Right.
are those are really the things that I'm looking for. I think the other thing also that I would recommend to your listeners as a young attorney, that I would try to do is, to the extent that you have any free time, any time outside of practicing law, we're also looking for people um, who maybe having community involvement, right? People who have an interest in more just than just themselves, or more just than dollars at a law firm. Because I think at some point, and it's especially important right now when we're going through what could be considered a crisis, you have
Yeah.
to
Oh yeah.
you have to have people who are willing to pull their weight and who are willing to help in any area imaginable. So it can't just be about, I'm going to bill the most hours, I'm going to be the best lawyer. There are firms where that's probably the right type of person. That's not the right person for us. We also have to have, and we want to have people who care about the community, who care about helping not just our clients, but the world around us.
Yeah.
And so that's also, I think, another suggestion that gets a little bit overlooked, because I do
Yeah.
think there are folks out there, there are firms out there that's an important part of what they're looking for, and it's certainly what we're looking for at our firm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When you're interviewing and looking to identify some of those cultural issues and fits, are those things that you are, I mean, very directly asking about in terms of like, working in a team versus working as an individual, or are you sort of more just trying to get a sense from the way they answer questions or the way they communicate, or in a more subtle way? Trying to kind of figure out, I mean, because people can say whatever you want to hear in an interview too. So how do you try to go about identifying that and kind of getting that true answer out of them?
Yeah, good question. I think there's a few things that we've implemented now. Number one, if they're going to go on to a team, we have team leads, other senior associates that work at our firm. I have to have them involved in the interview process also. So
Right.
it's not
Yep.
just me. It's not just April, my wife, and my law partner.
Yep.
We have the team leads that get involved also. Um, I think the other thing also is it's not necessarily that we're looking for someone who has worked on a team before. We're looking for someone who is open-minded, who understands that inside working on a team, there has to be some level of flexibility. So,
Right.
for example, I've had people that have come in and interviewed and said, "Well, I just have an interest in going to court, or I just have an interest in taking depositions." That's probably not the type of person we're looking for, because
Yeah.
we're really looking for people who can handle anything. Because frankly,
Right.
we don't know now, especially we don't know what the future brings. So if I wanted someone who, if I hired someone who was just looking on handling hearings or going to court, it's kind of hard to do that right now in the present
Yeah.
situation. So we're
Sure.
looking for people who are going to be adaptable, who are open to new things, and frankly, who express an interest in being a part of a team and in being a part of our culture.
Yeah.
But I think it's trial and errors. It's certainly talking through interviews, having multiple interviews. And the other thing I think is references. References are extremely important. I would almost challenge anybody who is going out there looking for a new job to be prepared with references, not people who are lifelong friends or not people that you worked
Yeah.
with, that you worked under in law school, but people that you have worked with in the job market, in the legal field, who can give some sort of an honest or valid opinion as to your work product. That's way more important than the person you went to high school with or the law professor that you worked under. And I have gotten some of those references, and they were given to me, and I don't think that they were as positive as the candidate thought they would be.
Yeah.
But I certainly have gone out of my way to check every reference, because sometimes as small law firms we get so busy and we think, well, I don't have time to do that. I have a good feel. I sort of learned my lesson with that. And so we do everything we can to check those references. I would encourage your listeners to make sure that they have the references lined up, that they've talked to them in advance, and that
Yeah.
they have an
For sure.
understanding that people are going to call and ask questions about their work product.
You absolutely should be ready for it, no doubt. Well, Brian, thank you so much for taking the time. We've got some quick hitter questions to finish up our time with. If you're ready to roll.
I'm ready.
All right. Name one trait or characteristic you most want to see in an associate.
Excellent writing.
Yeah, good. What habit has been key to your success?
I would say probably not burning bridges. And you never know the person you meet as a first or second year, where they're going to be when you're practicing as a 20-year attorney. So
Yeah.
certainly it's critical to make sure that everyone understands practicing law is a long road. Many attorneys practice for 50 years. Making a mistake or making an enemy with someone your first few years, you'll probably
Yeah,
run
that's
into
good.
him again. So I think I've done a pretty good job of trying to play nice in the sandbox.
Yeah, yeah. And yoga a close second on that one, right?
Exactly.
um, favorite app or productivity tool? We talked about Clio already.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I'm a big fan of Clio, but I think any app where for attorneys where you're keeping track of expenses, whether that's Expensify or anything else, because for so many of us, we have to log those expenses, we have to turn those in. That's really important. And then any app where you can keep track of your time, your billable hours,
Right.
that is extremely important.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, this is a new question for this category, just for our Corona 2020. Favorite new or rehashed activity during social distancing? What do you got going on?
What I've had the most fun with is creating a daily soccer game with my kids in my backyard.
Yeah.
So
hey, I've been doing that too.
Yeah. So I think if there is any benefit to this social distancing, it's those of us that have families where we have spent so much time away from them, trying to build a business or trying to get something started, or as many attorneys do, we're on the road. This is a really good time to sort of reconnect with those friends or family or loved ones. And so I'm really enjoying that aspect.
Yeah, for sure. Last one, your favorite all-time legal movie?
All-time legal movie. I would probably have to go with The Firm on this one. I mean, it's just one of
Yeah,
those, one of those that I saw pretty early on when I was trying to figure out if that's something that I want to do.
yeah,
Certainly, the Grisham novels were
yeah,
something that I enjoyed reading as a younger attorney.
yeah.
But I think that was a good one. Like everything else, well, like practicing law on television shows or on movies, it's not always the same. Uh,
Right.
but
Right.
it provides an interesting perspective,
Yeah,
and certainly was one that interested me.
absolutely. Well, and I wonder, though. Yeah, I think we're a similar generation, and the John Grisham novels and movies were part of kind of our coming of age. And I wonder if that'll be have a renaissance during this social distancing. That seems like a good well to go back to.
I think that the books and the movies and
Yeah,
the
yeah,
streaming of movies,
yeah, yeah.
now's a good time to get caught up on all of your legal thrillers.
That's right. That's right. Well, Brian, thank you so much for being on here, and congratulations on the success that of your firm and all the things that you guys are doing. It's exciting, and wish you all the best through this uncertain, scary period, but also just in general and everything else in the future. So, thanks for coming and being part of the show.
Daniel, I enjoyed it, and I look forward to doing it again.
All right. My thanks again to Brian Lopez for joining us on the show and for being kind of the first person that we've talked with since the coronavirus outbreak. And so just so grateful for him. And I'm just glad that he has been out in front of all this and was able to give such great perspective and guidance to all of us. And so thanks, Brian, so much for being on the show. If you enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll subscribe and not miss another one. I will continue to try to get episodes in front of you that are related to what is going on. Some of them will have been recorded prior, but we'll mix it and as much as we can. And tell your friends and colleagues in the legal community about the show so we can serve as many of you as possible. Of course, rate and review in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can always email me directly if you have thoughts or suggestions about the show, Daniel@varsitysearch.com. We also have our movie verdicts episodes going. We did Marshall just this past Thursday. So that is in your feed. That is our, I believe, fifth movie that we have done. And so if you want to go back during this social distancing time and either watch some of those older movies or listen to our podcasts where we talk about either My Cousin Vinny or A Few Good Men, The Lincoln Lawyer, Witness for the Prosecution, and now Marshall, we're going to be doing some others here shortly. So we'll get more in front of you on that. All right, that is all for today's episode of Lone Star Lawyers. Again, thank you so much for listening. I'm Daniel Hare with Varsity Search, and we will talk to you next time.